Okay. Few more seconds and we'll get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Again, welcome to those who have just joined. I'm excited to have you. Hoping this will be a valuable use of your time and there will be some takeaways that you can incorporate in the next, gosh, what are we? We're already in the middle of November. So the next couple of months as we go through Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's. Before we know it, it will be New Year's. I like the celebration emoji. Yes. Okay, it's noon. We'll get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to chat today about fueling a joyful mindset and thinking about something valuable to discuss. I thought this would be a really great time to talk about the many opportunities that we have throughout the day to give us this boost in our mood, or also when we're going to lots of holiday parties, lots of celebrations. How does our nutrition impact our mental health? So we will just dive right in. So, what are we going to be covering today? Well, essentially, what does mental health look like during the holidays? And then I want to talk about this emerging field of research called nutritional psychiatry. Look at some of the research that's out there. We want to make sure when we are discussing interventions that they are research-based. And then I always like to look at the glass half full. It can be really easy to get into doomsday, all of the bad, but what's the good? And really, what are easy, small habits that we can break down that are going to benefit us today, tomorrow, and the next day without being overwhelming? And then I thought it would be fun to have recipes that accompany this. So at the end, there will be a QR code, and I have a handout full of recipes to try. And again, the idea is just quick tips that we can incorporate during a busy season. So what does mental health look like today? Why should we care? Why is this important? Well, in 2024, 43% of the adults say they're feeling more anxious than they did the previous year. This continues to increase. And what we saw is it's up 37% in 2023 and 32% in 2022. And we got this from the American Psychiatric Association. And then when we look at changes in mood, unfortunately, we're also seeing an increase in people who are becoming victims of suicide. And numbers of individuals who died by suicide in 2022 was the highest number ever recorded in the United States. The other part of this coin is that it is becoming more difficult to access care. One of the reasons, as you can see here, there are 340 people for every mental health provider in the United States. Also, our kiddos are being impacted by this. So 70% of kids who seek mental health care or substance use care do not receive care. And then what is the impact during the holidays? Well, during the holidays, there is a lot to celebrate, enjoy, and be grateful for. But that doesn't discount some of the other impacts that we may have. There's stress, good and bad, meaning that we might have more holiday parties, more friend commitments, more social gatherings than we have time for. Some of us still have to work full-time jobs and take care of our houses and our bills. And then you have all these social obligations. So while that's good, that can increase pressure. Also, there can be this feeling of, I don't want to let anybody down. What if I miss this party and I make it to somebody else's? Are there going to be hurt feelings? And family dynamics. Sometimes there are strained relationships. On the flip side, we could have lost a family member in the past year, or maybe we are in an estranged relationship, or have relationships that are strained due to conflict. So there can be loneliness and isolation. Also, what we see when the time changes and we get into winter months, we have less exposure to the sun, and that can lead to something called seasonal affectiveness disorder. This can be a seasonal depression during these times of not having sunlight is impacting our mood, causing us to feel depressed. We also see an increase in substance use, and that's multifactorial. There's more holiday parties, there can be more substances. Also, 33% of Americans will use substances to treat mood symptoms. So if we're feeling down, stressed, anxious, we may use substances to make us feel better, even though it doesn't last in the long run. Okay, so remember I said we're gonna also look at the fun. We're not gonna just focus on the bad. Well, let's look at some of the fun holiday statistics, because that's pretty heavy what we just went through. Okay, well, how many cookies are we consuming? Americans bake and consume over 1.7 billion cookies. Question here for the group. Fruitcake, who loves it? Who hates it? Who's never eaten it? I have actually never eaten fruitcake before. However, it is clearly popular because 2 billion pounds of fruitcake are produced each year in the United States. Oh, I knew the fruitcake would get lots of comments. I love it. Candy canes. All right, well, let's just look at the little Mr. and Mrs. Candy Cane. 1.76 billion candy canes are produced each year. If we were to wrap them around the earth end to end, it would go around 6.5 times. That's a lot of candy canes. But okay, what does this mean in terms of our health? Well, like I said, we can tend to reach for substances. Sometimes that's in alcohol or in food. There's a reason why our minds do that when we think about comfort foods. It releases dopamine in our brain, so we get this transient feeling of happiness. And so we tend to reach for those, and we can reach for them more and more during the holiday. Now, please hear me. If your grandma makes the best pumpkin pie ever, or your mom's favorite casserole, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be eating our favorite dishes, but it's just providing us a space to be mindful about our choices. And then also, where do we fit in some of the other foods that benefit our mood that we'll be talking about today? Always just thinking about this in a very non-judgmental, mindful way. I was talking about increased substance use. This actually really shocked me when I was doing a deep dive for this presentation. I knew that it was high, but I didn't know it was quite this high. So between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, there's a significant rise in driving under the influence, excuse me. And nearly 40% of traffic fatalities during this time involve a driver who's impaired by alcohol. We also see that during the holidays, alcohol consumption can increase by as much as 40%. And then we see an increase in domestic violence incidents too. So again, this may not be impacting us, but it may be impacting a loved one, just providing this space of grace and empathy for other people. Okay, so to the topic we're going to discuss today. So there, again, I was talking about this emerging field called nutritional psychiatry. What is that? This is new. So this is a field that explores the relationship between diet and mental health. And it's looking at how certain foods, nutrients, dietary food patterns influence brain function, mood, and just our overall psychological well-being. What they're looking at, or one of the main things that they're looking at that we'll talk a lot today, is something called the brain-gut connection. Also, the role of our microbiome and inflammation. Those are the three things that we're going to talk about today. Also, there's oxidative stress and how we produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. I promise I'm going to make this interesting. where you're not going to fall asleep in a neurobiology lesson. But just so you know where the evidence for this is coming out of. And because this is a very exciting field with lots of research, we're seeing very large institutions. So think about in not only in the United States, but globally. So Deakin University in Australia, they have a food and mood center. And one of the studies we're going to talk about today, the SMILES trial, came out of the University of Australia. Also, Harvard Medical School, they have the nutritional psychiatry program at Mass General. And again, looking at the impact of high ultra-processed, high sugar foods and the impact on our mood, microbiome, all the things we were talking about. And lastly, we see King's College in London. They have a department of psychological medicine and the gut-brain axis research group. So what are we supposed to be eating to help support? Well, we'll talk about that in some of the research, but I thought it would be fun to look at just what are we seeing in terms of consuming fruits and vegetables in the United States? Well, 1 in 10 Americans meets the minimal daily federal recommendation for fruits and vegetables. What is that? How much are you supposed to be eating? So we should be eating 1.5 to 2 cups of fruits per day and 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per day. But only 1 in 10 adults is meeting this. However, 9 out of 10 adults are exceeding our recommendation for sodium. This is because we're getting a lot of foods not in whole form, but in processed form. Remember I said we're going to talk about this whole brain-gut communication? Well, we have 200 million neurons that are communicating via the nervous system. And as you can see over here on the right, there's a lot that's impacted by this. So our nervous system, our behaviors, the neurotransmitters we produce, our sleep, how our digestion works. These are all things that we're going to talk about today. And essentially that what we see is that if we lean more towards vegetables, fiber, fermented foods, omega-3s, unprocessed carbohydrates, all the research we're seeing tends to weigh in having positive mental health outcomes versus high fat, high sugar, and ultra processed foods. Again, that doesn't mean that we're never going to have our favorite chocolate, pizza, burger, but just having an appropriate balance and being mindful of what we eat that's on our plate or at the end of our fork impacts our health. Okay, so let's look at one of the research studies. What are we seeing here? So this looked at food diaries from 12,385 randomly sampled adults. And what I like about this study is they adjusted for changes in their income or their personal circumstances. And the outcome, increased fruit and vegetable consumption, was predictive of increased happiness and life satisfaction and well-being. Now, to put this into a perspective that we can understand, what they saw in terms of improvement when they were using the scale to measure happiness and well-being would be equated to if you went from being unemployed to employed. Now, I've worked in mental health for 20 years, and some of those jobs were in nonprofits. Nonprofits can collapse overnight, and I have not had a job before working in nonprofit. And I remember how stressful that was in comparison to then when I found another job. So to me, that feels pretty significant that that was a change in their happiness levels. And the other interesting thing about this, when I talk to patients in clinic, we talk about all sorts of ways, in addition to medication sometimes and therapy, to help their overall physical and mental health. And that includes how we stress, how we sleep, how we eat, how we move our bodies. And out of all of the pillars of health, one that continues to be one of the easiest I see implemented is exercise, because exercise has this immediate release of endorphins and dopamine and serotonin. So it's very motivating. People want to keep doing it again. And what they saw in this study is that people got the positive effects of the fruits and vegetables quite quickly, as opposed to when people start eating fruits and vegetables for overall health, that can take some time to build up and see the fruits of your labor, pun intended. But what they saw here in terms of mental well-being, that came sooner. Okay, so what are some of the things that we can eat? We're going to start with probiotic foods. So probiotic foods contain live beneficial microorganisms like bacteria and yeast that are naturally present in our digestive system. And what we see is that they help support a healthy bacteria, microbiome, gut, nutrient absorption, immune function. There's multiple benefits there. And what are some of our probiotic foods? Well, you can see a list of them here. So kimchi, miso, tempeh, sauerkraut, kefir, yogurt, all ways that we can start including these foods. So what about yogurt for breakfast or a snack? Kimchi on our salad, miso soup, when we go out to get sushi. Tempeh is a plant-based protein option. Sauerkraut on our burgers or sandwiches. Again, this idea of where can I just include stuff? This doesn't need to be, I have to cut out everything. Where can I start adding in beneficial foods? And when we think about probiotics, we see research that they're improving food or improving mood. And remember when I was saying we're going to talk about probably 3 key areas. So how we produce neurotransmitters, how we have a diverse gut, and how we decrease inflammation. And we can see that on all three of those areas when we're eating probiotic foods. Okay, so I have a handout at the end that will have lots of recipes, but I've also sprinkled them throughout here to kind of get an idea of what this would look like. So what about kimchi fried rice? We have brown rice, kimchi, sesame seed oil, garlic, onion, carrots. You can see the list is not too long, but enough to have some of those beneficial probiotics in our diet. And again, you will get this at the end. Okay, so remember when I was talking about Deakin University in Australia and the SMILES trial? So the SMILES trial stood for supporting the modification of lifestyle and lowered emotional states. And what this looked at was the impact of a Mediterranean-style diet on individuals with moderate to severe depression. This was published in 2017 in BMC Medicine. And what they saw is that they took 2 groups of individuals. And one of the groups was the intervention group. And they received dietary counseling to adopt a modified Mediterranean-style diet. That includes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, fish, olive oil, low-fat dairy, and then reduced intake of processed foods. So think sugary snacks and also alcohol. The control group received social support, so no dietary intervention, and they did this for 12 weeks. And what they found is that the dietary intervention group showed significant improvement in their depression symptoms. So 32% of the participants in the diet group achieved remission compared to 8% of the control group. That was a pretty good finding. They also found the adherence rates were higher. So Mediterranean diet seemed to be something that people could continue to do, meaning they enjoyed it, which is really important. If you have an intervention that has a good outcome, but you can't sustain it, well, that's really important. Okay, so we talked about probiotics. Let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids. So these are essential fats that play a significant role in our brain health and mood regulation. And research suggests that omega-3s can improve mood by, again, remember these 3 keywords you're going to hear. Inflammation. So inflammation was first discovered as a correlation between mood in the 1800s by one of the first psychiatrists to win a Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, since then, there's been lots of research. But inflammation tends to be bad for every organ system that we have. And that plays out very true for mood. So we see omega-3s playing an important role in decreasing inflammation in our body. And then remember that those neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, so help modulating neurotransmitter function and then supporting brain cell structure. Okay, well, how can we increase some omegas in our diet? Chia seed pudding. So we have berries and chia seeds, walnuts, flax seeds, and hemp seeds. This is kind of like the bonus with some extra bonus on top of it because berries are our highest antioxidant food. The only thing that we have that's higher antioxidant would be spices. So I always say, if you can eat beans and berries every day, this would be like one of the biggest bangs for your buck in terms of nutritional support for both mind and body. Okay, so this has a lot of words on it, and we won't spend time, and we could spend hours and hours, and I'm not going to do that because I don't want anybody to fall asleep. But if I could just have you have one takeaway, is again this reminder that our brain talks to our gut and our gut talks to our brain. And that there are so many ways that what we eat impacts this microbiota gut-brain connection. And the neurotransmitters, the fight or flight, the secretion of mucus, short-chain fatty acids, all of those impact it. Now, for time's sake, we're not going to go through all those, but I just wanted to point out a couple of them. So you've heard me talk about neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Those influence our mood, our anxiety, and stress. But one thing I want to call out is that 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. However, when we eat a diet that is disproportionately high in sugary foods, processed foods, ultra-processed foods that make up about 60% of the American diet today, this can lead to dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means it's an imbalance in the gut bacteria. And that alters our neurotransmitter levels. So remember the dopamine, serotonin, and GABA that we want that help improve our mood. And then inflammation. So from our mouth to our anus, we have one cell thick lining that is our digestive tract, one little tiny cell. And what we see when we have inflammation is that impacts our barrier integrity and something called zonulins. Those are proteins that help keep that a nice protective layer between our digestive system and toxins that our digestive system is clearing out, and then our bloodstream. But when we have dysbiosis in our gut, or we do not have a diverse microbiome with the good gut bugs, we see that integrity is compromised. We're going to talk about the HPA axis as well. So that's I think our fight or flight. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's why we say HPA for short. But essentially, this governs our body's stress response. And when we have an imbalanced microbiome, this leads to an overactive HPA axis. And so we can have this heightened level of stress and anxiety. Now, before we lose anybody, we're going to move on. But I hope that this is just an example of how it's multifactorial. What we're eating is impacting so many different systems in our body. Okay. Well, we've talked about increasing probiotic food and omega-3s. Well, what's the cheat for this? I always like, what is the easy one thing I can think of? I don't want to think about all these things. So if I just had one thing to think about, it would be fiber. If you wanted the simple cheat, it would be every time you sit down at a meal, how much fiber are you eating in that meal? And here's a little way to check that. And we're going to show you what would be good, where you could improve, and what would be great. So we see beans. Look at beans, a whopping 7 points. These are incredible for us. Also, soy products, fruits and vegetables, grains. So thinking of grains like bran, oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, whole grain pastas, and then nuts, seeds, and avocados. So what does that look like? Well, less than 21 points per day. This doesn't mean bad. This just means we have opportunity for improvement. 21 to 39. Good. Let's keep on going. And more than 39 is excellent. So you're getting a lot of fiber in your diet. And just for fun, I wanted to look at what I ate yesterday to count up how many points I got, but also as an example that this doesn't need to be difficult. So in the morning for breakfast, I had oatmeal, berries, and bananas. Quick, relatively cheap food that was easy to make. For lunch, I had rice, some edamame, and broccoli, all that I could prepare ahead of time. Again, quick and easy. I'm about quick and easy in this busy world. And then for dinner, a side salad with some shredded carrots, a Japanese sweet potato, some tofu, and some beans. And when I added that up, it was 43 points. Those beans really help. So remember when I always tell patients to eat beans and berries? That fiber helps our microbiome in terms of its preferred food. And that's where we get that diversity, the decrease in inflammation, the help in producing our neurotransmitters, all the things that I talked about on this slide. Having fiber supports a healthy microbiome. So when you sit down to eat, think about what foods am I eating that are packed with fiber, and then count your number. Another recipe that we'll share. So the bell pepper stuffed with brown rice and black beans. You're getting points for the beans, for the rice, and for the bell pepper. Oh, and the corn as well. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time. I just wanted to talk about one other thing quickly called brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF for short. BDNF controls the growth of new nerve cells. So we can see atrophy in our brains and imaging of brains with people that have mental health conditions. And the nurses study out of Harvard followed tens of thousands of women for years. And what they found is that high flavonoids appeared to have a reduced risk of depression. Flavonoids, spoiler alert, naturally occur in plants. And where do we get those? So I just wanted to say, well, we'll skip to here. Here we go. Apples, oranges, grapefruits, plums, strawberries, raspberries, cherries, blueberries, blackberries, onions, peppers, radishes, eggplants, spinach, cherry tomatoes, asparagus, red cabbage. These are high flavonoid foods that help us produce BDNF, increasing new nerve cells in our brain. Now, when I was talking about what I ate yesterday, I had berries, which is on this list. Let's see, did I eat anything else yesterday when I was talking about that? This is fun where you can gamify this with people in your household, maybe coworkers, counting up your number. How many flavonoid foods did I have? Now, over on the right, just because that says low flavonoid doesn't mean we don't want to eat them. They're all high with fiber, which is fantastic. We see lots of beans over here. It just means that those aren't the beneficial when we're looking at BDNF, but these are beneficial when we're increasing fiber for our gut microbiome. So another recipe, Mediterranean quinoa salad. Okay, so I talked about the SMILES trial, and they followed an anti-inflammatory Mediterranean diet. And if you want to see how you're doing on that type of eating pattern, there's a little quiz here you can take. And again, with the idea of no negativity surrounding this, just what is my opportunity and what are some of the foods that I can include in my meals? Here is a QR code to download the slides and access the recipes shared today. I was having a conversation yesterday regarding this topic when I was saying I was going to be presenting on this. And we got to talking about how many meals we will be eating during the holiday season. And if you averaged out for a couple of months, 3 meals a day, it's 180 meals. People eat more than that sometimes and maybe a little less than that. That's a lot of opportunity. This is also where I said to be very mindful for that holiday party that you love this pie somebody makes or casserole. Let's say 10 out of those 180 opportunities, you had that food that made you so happy. You still have 170 meals to fill your plate with fiber and micronutrients and polyphenols to support you during this busy holiday season. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have a lovely season with your family and friends.